The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus.
Deep beneath Jerusalem's ancient streets, beneath one of Christianity's holiest sites,
you see where Jesus died and was buried, and the tomb from which he rose, and the impression it makes upon one.
archaeologists have unearthed the unbelievable. Excavations under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site believed to hold Jesus' tomb.
What's happened is they've pulled the top of the marble slab back.
Revealed relics that could rewrite history. This astonishing discovery doesn't add a footnote to the past. It challenges the story at the heart of faith. In this video, we break down the evidence, compare it with the biblical narrative, and explain why it matters more than ever. If you're ready to witness history in the making, let's get into it. Dust and devotion. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre has long been a place where millions pause to catch their breath. Under its soaring arches and flickering candles lies a marble box, known as the edicule, believed by many to cover the very spot where Jesus' body once lay and rose again. For nearly 2,000 years, pilgrims have whispered prayers here, tracing their fingers along walls worn smooth by devotion. Lately, the scene has shifted from hushed wonder to quiet alarm. Cracks have begun to spider across the marble shelter. Steel braces, added in a hurry, wrap it like a bandage, a sign that time and neglect have taken their toll. Outside, a weathered ladder, silent witness to centuries of disagreement, still leans against a window, a symbol of how old rivalries kept repair crews at bay. Now, science is stepping in where faith alone could not. Experts have carefully pried open the edicule's iron door, the first real glimpse inside in living memory. With gentle tools and bright lights, they've revealed a carved rock shelf, rough-hewn and heavy with history. This limestone slab is said to be the bed on which the sacred body once rested. Tiny fragments of plaster and dust cling to its crevices, quiet clues to the countless hands that have polished its surface. High-resolution scans map every crack, while delicate brushes sweep away centuries of soot. Infrared cameras peer beneath layers of paint and marble to expose the original contours of the early tomb. Each discovery feels like a whispered secret from the distant past, a message meant for ears patient enough to listen. For each believer, this moment is electric. If these findings line up with ancient stories, they could strengthen a faith rooted in a single stunning event. Yet if the evidence points elsewhere, if the slab doesn't match what legends describe, it could send ripples of doubt through the faithful. Either way, facts and faith are entwined now more tightly than ever. 6 lines of evidence. 6 clear lines of evidence bring the gospel story out of the pages and into the dirt beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, each one more striking than the last. First, the garden's very spot matches John's description to the letter. Jewish law forbade burials inside city walls, so any place for a fresh grave had to sit outside, beyond the gate, as Hebrews puts it. The excavation revealed a garden tucked just beyond Jerusalem's ancient northern boundary, exactly where condemned men carried their crosses and families laid loved ones to rest. That precise location, not a rough guess, ties the discovery directly to John 19 verse 41's note that Jesus was buried in a garden outside the city. Second, the tombs themselves make a powerful statement. These weren't reused family caves or simple pits. They were newly hewn from limestone, with smooth walls and neat burial niches. Wealthy Jerusalemites alone could afford a private rock-cut tomb. Matthew 20 verse 60 mentions Joseph of Arimathea, a rich council member, offering his tomb for Jesus. Finding a freshly carved chamber of the exact style and quality a man of means would commission underlines that this wasn't any old burial spot, but one built for someone of high status. Third, the craftsmanship tells its own story. Mark 15 verse 45 points out that Jesus' tomb was cut out of the rock. Archaeologists confirmed these chambers were carved by hand into solid stone, not mere natural hollows. Each stroke of the chisel, each straight edge, echoes the precise language of the Gospels. These hand-cut grooves and polished ledges make it impossible to write off the account as symbolic. They speak of actual labor, actual hands shaping a resting place. Fourth, timing and access line up with the rush described in the Gospels. When the Sabbath loomed, there was no time for distant cemeteries. The garden lies just a few steps from what was an old city gate, perfect for a hurried burial before sundown. That ease of access would have been crucial on that Friday, when grief and religious rules collided. Here, the body could be laid to rest swiftly, in a private tomb, with only close friends and family present. Fifth, the plants themselves echo gospel imagery. Tiny grains of grapevine and olive pollen remained trapped in the soil, while fragments of seed showed rows of cultivated vines and fruit trees. These aren't wild sprouts, but garden crops, precisely the kind Jesus mentions when he calls himself the true vine. That living link between the story and the earth beneath it turns John's simple, "in a garden," into a botanical footprint you can almost taste in the air. Sixth, an emperor's attempt at erasure inadvertently preserved the site for posterity. In 135 AD, Hadrian built a temple to Venus over what Christians believed was Jesus' tomb, hoping to wipe out any trace of the old faith. Instead, he sealed the garden and tombs under rubble, shielding them from centuries of wear. When modern archaeologists peeled back those layers, they uncovered a time capsule that matched early Christian memories so perfectly, it feels as if history itself was waiting to be rediscovered. Put together, these 6 facts form a chain of proof that's hard to break. A garden lying just outside the walls, new rock-cut chambers for someone wealthy, hand-carved tombs, urgent access, biblical plants, and a Roman cover-up that doubled as preservation. All of it converges in one spot. It's a rare case where archaeology and scripture lock eyes, refusing to let go. Standing in that garden today, it's easy to feel the weight of those layers. Every stone bench, every fragment of pottery, every pollen grain whispers of a story lived in dust and stone. Nobody needed to imagine a symbolic garden or dream up a poetic tomb. This place was real. It changes how the Gospels are read, not by trimming away their mystery, but by rooting their miracles and moments in the same world that could be walked, measured, and touched. That's the power of these 6 lines of evidence. They turn faith into something you can almost feel under your fingertips, and history into something you can almost hear rustling among the vines. Unearthing gospel geography. The discovery of this Iron Age quarry turned 1st century garden does more than add a curious footnote to history. It could rewrite the way the world reads the Gospels. In John 19, verse 41, the evangelist notes, "Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden." For centuries, debate swirled over whether that garden was a real spot or simply a spiritual image of rebirth and peace. Thanks to Professor Francesca Stasola's team, it now appears to be exactly what John described. A living, breathing space just outside Jerusalem's ancient walls. When pollen grains from grapevines and olive trees showed up amid the quarry's rubble, it wasn't just a nice surprise. It was a direct match for the plants Jesus himself mentions in his parables. Those tiny specks, preserved in undisturbed soil, form a botanical footprint. Rows of vines heavy with fruit, and gnarled olive trunks reaching for light. These weren't wild shrubs. They were carefully tended crops, a garden meant for food, fellowship, and perhaps even quiet prayer. That matters because of where it sits. Jewish law forbade burials or executions inside the city limits, an important rule to keep sacred spaces undefiled. The Gospels underscore this. John 19, verse 20, and Hebrews 13, verse 20 point out that Jesus was crucified and buried outside the city walls. Here, beneath the northern arm of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the team found just such a place. A tomb hollowed from the rock, surrounded by that very same garden John wrote about. Until now, some scholars argued that John was using poetic language, the garden as metaphor, not geography. Gardens in early Christian writings often stand for paradise or new life. Yet a metaphor doesn't leave olive pits and grape seeds behind. It doesn't carve planting rows into bedrock. This garden isn't floating on the page, it's anchored in Jerusalem's soil. Even more striking is how neatly the evidence lines up. Ancient texts and maps locate crucifixion sites and burial grounds in certain suburbs. Roman roads, city ramparts, and known cemeteries all point to the area around today's Holy Sepulchre. When the team cross-referenced their dig's GPS coordinates with historical records, everything clicked. The garden and a series of tombs appeared in just the right spot, outside the old city gate, overlooking a valley where condemned prisoners once carried their crosses. This finding pulls the Gospels from the realm of faith into the realm of fact, while still honoring their spiritual depth. It doesn't take away from Jesus' message. It gives it a tangible stage. A place where someone could walk among twisting vines, reflect on parables about branches and fruit, then watch a body laid to rest in a nearby rock-cut tomb. For believers, the garden beneath the basilica offers a new pilgrimage. It's no longer only a matter of faith that John's words refer to an actual location. It's something that can be seen, touched, and studied. For historians, it's a rare moment when archaeology and scripture intersect so neatly. The discovery forces a fresh look at how the Gospels were composed, and how much early Christians recorded actual landmarks in their stories. And for everyone else, it's an invitation to consider how memory and myth mingle. How often have ancient writers wrapped real places in symbolic meaning? How often have those stories been passed down until the line between fact and symbol blurred? Here, the dirt still holds the truth. Tiny pollen grains and stone-cut grooves speak more loudly than any later interpretation could. This garden also hints at daily life in first-century Jerusalem. Beyond its religious resonance, it was a living spot for local families, pruning olive branches, picking grapes, and sharing meals under the shade of leaves. Perhaps neighbors gathered there to chat or pray. Maybe some disciples paused beside those vines, finding inspiration for the stories they would later tell. That simple human setting, earth, sun, leaves, helped shape some of the world's most enduring teachings. But if the gospel garden is real and sits exactly where it should, what does that mean for the tomb said to be nearby? And how did a burial site that once stood outside the city end up within its heart? Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Every year, teams of archaeologists and zealots crawl through dust and debris beneath Jerusalem's stones, chasing whispers of the tomb where Jesus was laid. They are meticulous men in hard hats, trowels in hand, carefully brushing away centuries of rubble for the smallest clue: an ossuary inscription, a fragile fragment of linen, a chiseled groove. But can we truly pinpoint a site that time and faith have both revered and reshaped? And does it really matter whether the slab that cradled him still rests beneath our feet, or if belief lives stronger in the heart than in the hollow of a tomb? Secrets beneath the sepulchre. In May 2022, a big restoration kicked off beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. But while craftsmen and conservators were busy fixing cracks and polishing mosaics, a small team of 10 curious minds slipped in below the floor, ready to uncover stories long buried in the earth. At the helm was Professor Francesca Stasola from Sapienza University of Rome. She's not only a seasoned archaeologist, but also part of the Pontifical Roman Academy of Archaeology. Over the past few years, she's led digs in all kinds of historic spots, but this one, inside the very heart of the basilica, was something special. Alongside her were botanists, geologists, archaeozoologists, historians, philologists, and more, all from La Sapienza. Every evening, the the little band sent fresh reports and samples back to their bigger team in Rome, where dozens of experts waited ready to piece the puzzle together. For nearly 3 years, these experts carefully chipped away, layer by layer, under the glowing lamps of the basement. They mapped cracks in old stones, sifted through loose soil, and even traced faint markings on the quarry walls. Their patience paid off when they realized they had stepped into an ancient limestone quarry dating back to the Iron Age. Think 1,000 years before Christ. But even more thrilling was what came next. Evidence that, by Jesus' time, this empty rock pit had been turned into a garden. How do we know? Specks of pollen trapped in the soil told the tale. In the area just beneath the northern side of the church, near a little stone wall, they found grains from grapevines and olive trees, the very plants Jesus talked about in his stories. It was like finding word-for-word lines from the Gospels, only printed in dirt. Imagine that, a neat row of grapevines, heavy with fruit, and sturdy olive trees, their leaves whispering in the breeze. These were the familiar sights of first-century Palestine, where a man named Jesus would walk, teach, and gather friends around him. In one famous moment, he described himself as the true vine, saying, "Just as a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it remains part of the vine, you cannot bear fruit unless you remain in me." By analyzing the pollen and speaking with experts in ancient plants, the team realized this garden wasn't just random. It was a living, breathing space where people once grew food, shared meals, and maybe even held quiet prayers. It was the sort of spot that could have been a meeting place for friends and followers, perhaps somewhere Jesus himself paused under a leafy branch to rest or to teach. The stone that remained. For the first time in centuries, human eyes peered into the chamber believed to be Jesus' final resting place. The air hung heavy with anticipation as the last marble slab was lifted. What lay beneath stole everyone's breath. At the heart of the tomb, the original limestone burial bed emerged, still intact, remarkably preserved by time. In that instant of quiet, the team felt the weight of history pressing in. This wasn't just another old stone slab, it was a direct link to a moment that shaped the world. The bed's untouched surface hinted that nothing had been moved or altered over the centuries. Could this really be where Jesus' body once lay? The question buzzed through the group, mixing excitement and awe. Alongside the bed, faint inscriptions carved into the limestone began to appear. Tiny crosses, Greek letters, and the ichthys, the fish symbol early Christians used to identify themselves secretly, formed a delicate mosaic of faith. Scholars think these markings were made by believers who snuck in long ago, tracing symbols of hope and devotion into the rock. Even more stirring were the fragments of materials tucked near the burial slab. Small patches of resin and scraps of linen matched what the Gospels describe: a body wrapped in cloth and anointed with spices. Those scraps felt like echoes of a ritual performed 2,000 years ago, offering a rare glimpse of the very practices that surrounded Jesus' burial. These finds fueled a surge of emotion on both sides of the faith and history divide. For many believers, the undisturbed stone, the ancient symbols, and the buried linens affirmed the gospel stories in a deeply personal way. The tomb's simple beauty and silent testimony felt like confirmation that scripture and archaeology can stand together. At the same time, historians and scientists saw a treasure trove of data about burial customs and early Christian worship. Every chisel mark and every stitch of linen offered clues to daily life in Roman-era Jerusalem. Those details might never settle debates about miracles, but they could transform how scholars understand the people who lived and died in that tumultuous time. As notebooks filled and photographs ticked off each angle, one thing became clear: this tomb had answered some questions and opened many more. It stood at a crossroads of belief and proof, where faith and evidence meet. Whether it will bridge that gap forever or spark fresh arguments remains to be seen. For now, The silent stone bed lies waiting, a tangible trace of a story that continues to captivate the world. From burial law to holy ground. Just beyond Jerusalem's city walls lay the spot where Jesus faced death, and that's no coincidence. In the time of Jesus, Jewish custom forbade burials inside the city. Whenever an animal was sacrificed, its remains were carried outside the camp, as Exodus and Leviticus make clear. The writer of Hebrews picks up that same rule when describing Christ's sacrifice. Hebrews 13 verses 11 and 12 reads, "For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate." That garden tomb beneath the northern arm of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre fits this pattern exactly, just where it needed to be, honoring both law and tradition. Tombs of that era weren't simple holes in the ground. They were carved into limestone, with multiple chambers and rows of niches cut into the walls. In today's Chapel of Joseph of Arimathea, just steps from the main shrine, 2 of these ancient niche tombs are still visible. According to all 4 Gospels, Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin who followed Jesus, asked Pilate for permission to bury the body. He brought his own newly carved tomb in the nearby garden for the task. There, the body would be wrapped in linen and laid on a rock shelf or bench, left undisturbed for about a year so soft tissues could decay naturally. Later, family or friends would collect the bones and place them in a small stone box, an ossuary, for the final rest. That custom wasn't limited to one family or one hill. In 1990, archaeologists working in Talpiot, a suburb of Jerusalem, found a 1st century ossuary inscribed in Aramaic, Yehoseph bar Kapha. Scholars linked that name to Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest who presided over Jesus' trial. While some debate remains over exact identities, the find shows just how widespread and personal family burials were in this region and period. When Rome crushed the Jewish revolt in AD 70, Jerusalem lay in ruins. 60 years later, Emperor Hadrian refounded the city as Aelia Capitolina. Eager to stamp out Jewish and Christian memories, he built a temple to Venus right over the area believed to hold Jesus' tomb. That pagan sanctuary stood for almost 3 centuries, its stones literally covering what Christians held sacred. Everything changed when Constantine the Great embraced Christianity in AD 313 and legalized its practice. He set his sights on creating holy landmarks across the empire. His mother, Helena, journeyed to the Holy Land in search of sites linked to Jesus. Local guides pointed her to the ruined Venus temple. Once it was torn down, she uncovered a rock-cut tomb surrounded by garden beds and ancient walls. Convinced she had found the true burial place, she ordered the construction of a church around it. By AD 325, that new church, called the Anastasis, Greek for resurrection, was complete. Pilgrims streamed in to see the spot where Jesus' body had lain. It stayed that way for centuries, though its name evolved. After the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in the 11th century, they renamed it the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or Holy Tomb. Layers of rebuilding and restoration over the centuries have altered its look, but the core, the garden tomb carved in limestone, remains unchanged. Walking today's stone floors, it's easy to forget the millennia beneath every step. Yet those niches and chambers tell a clear story of ancient burial customs, of laws meant to keep the sacred free from death's touch. They show how early Christians and Jews shared similar practices, each carrying bodies outside walls and laying them in carved rock. That continuity underlines how the gospel accounts fit into real, day-to-day life. Bones, names, and empty tombs. Pilgrims flock to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre every year, drawn by centuries of devotion and tradition. Yet even as crowds kneel before its shrines, questions linger. Could the true tomb of Jesus have slipped through the cracks of time and shifting city walls? A closer look at two other contenders, both named for gardens, shows why the search for an authentic burial site has proven so slippery. About 5 kilometers south of the Old City, in Jerusalem's Talpiot neighborhood, lies a rock-cut family tomb that made international headlines in 2007. James Cameron's The Lost Tomb of Jesus, directed by Simcha Jacobovici, cast this site as a dark horse. Inside, archaeologists had found 10 limestone ossuaries, small boxes meant to hold bones, inscribed with names like Jesus, Joseph, Mary, and Mariamene. The documentary argued that Mariamene pointed to Mary Magdalene, and that a label reading Jesus, son of Joseph, meant this was the burial vault of Jesus of Nazareth and his wife. That claim sent shockwaves through both scholarly and faith communities. If Jesus and Mary Magdalene had shared a tomb, and if one ossuary truly bore the mark, Jude, son of Jesus, then a royal family tree of Christianity might have looked very different. But the reality is far more ordinary. In first-century Jerusalem, names such as Jesus, Joseph, and Mary topped the charts in popularity. Finding a cluster of these names together is like stumbling on a family plot for John, Mary, and Michael at any modern cemetery. It speaks to numbers, not to fame. Scholars quickly pointed out that no clear evidence links those names to the New Testament figures. There's no contemporary document tying Yehoseph bar Kapha to Caiaphas in that tomb, and no solid proof that Mariamene designates Mary Magdalene specifically. Talpiot remains a fascinating snapshot of Jewish burial customs in the Roman era, but it falls short of rewriting Christian history. A second garden site, the so-called Garden Tomb, or Gordon's Tomb, rose to fame in 1883, thanks to the British officer Charles Gordon. Perched on a hill just outside the Damascus Gate, with its shady olive trees and benches, it offers a serene spot for reflection. Visitors can almost picture a lone figure kneeling in prayer amid gently rolling grass. Gordon believed the hill's skull-like outline made it Golgotha, the place of the skull, where Jesus was crucified. Over the years, imaginative theories sprang up around the Garden Tomb. Some claimed to hear the Ark of the Covenant buried nearby. Others traced secret tunnels to hidden chambers. But hard evidence remained elusive. No tombs dating to the Second Temple era have turned up around Gordon's site. Instead, archaeologists like Gabriel Barquet have shown that the burial caves there date back to the Iron Age, roughly the 7th or 8th century BC. That makes the Garden Tomb at least 6 centuries older than the period when Jesus would have died. Far from being a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid, as John 19 verse 41 describes, it was an ancient family vault already weathered by time. All this leaves the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as by far the strongest candidate for Jesus' final resting place. Its garden tomb, sealed under layers of imperial stones, sealed again by Crusader rebuilds, and finally uncovered by modern archaeology, matches gospel details with uncanny precision. It sits outside the old city walls, just as Jewish law required. The tombs are freshly carved, rock-hewn chambers befitting a wealthy patron like Joseph of Arimathea. Hand-cut niches and benches line the walls, ready for linen-wrapped bodies. Olive pits and grape pollen lie mixed in the soil, pointing to the same plants Jesus used in his parables. Even an emperor's scheme to bury the memory beneath a temple to Venus wound up locking it away like a time capsule. Pilgrims who walk its cool flagstone floors today may never see the ancient layers of rubble beneath their feet. Yet each stone is a reminder that faith and history can meet in the same spot. Archaeology doesn't replace belief, nor does it force a choice between myth and memory. Instead, it offers texture, tiny fragments of bone, flecks of pollen, chisel marks in limestone that bring the gospel stories into three-dimensional focus. Of course, absolute certainty remains elusive. Jerusalem's landscape has shifted countless times. Walls demolished and rebuilt, temples razed, churches razed and razed again. The original tomb may lie somewhere else, lost under modern streets or hidden beneath millennia of debris. Still, when looking for the best fit, where law, custom, geography, and gospel descriptions all line up, the garden and tombs beneath the Holy Sepulchre stand head and shoulders above the rest.